Well, hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Jazz Flashes podcast. My name is Anton Garcia Fernandez, coming to you over YouTube from Jackson, here in the state of Tennessee, in the United States of America. And believe it or not, this is the 9th yearly Bing Crosby podcast that Malcolm Macfarlane and I began almost a decade ago, and it has grown because we, for the past couple of years, have had a couple other interlocutors, so to speak. I think Bing would probably like that voice, that word, since his vocabulary was so good. And we're getting ready to do, as I say, podcast number 9, based on the music, the legacy, and the figure of Bing Crosby. And this time around, as I said, we have several people to talk to and several guests that all belong to the International Club Crosby, starting with Malcolm Macfarlane. Malcolm, it's always a pleasure to see you through the magic of Zoom and YouTube and the internet. Welcome to the show for the 9th time.
Thanks, Anton. Good to see you too.
And it's good also to see all three of them are in the UK, whereas I am here in the United States. Very nice to see also a man that has been responsible for a while now for the online meetings that we hold at the International Club Crosby every month on Zoom and then published on YouTube. He's also in the UK. Jason Liddiard, welcome, Jason.
Hello, thanks again for having me this time, Anton. Yeah, I'm really pleased with the way the meetings have gone. It's been more than a year. We started them in September 2023. The uptake has continued to increase, as you would have noticed last couple of times. We've had a couple of new members joining, or new faces joining. And I think we had 19 people in total, 19 participants at the Christmas meeting. So it's doing well right now, I think.
There's also quite a bit of interest in the recorded version of those meetings that we published
Yes.
on the channel for everyone around the world who may be interested in taking a look at them. And we always get to 200, 300 views every month, and that is pretty good.
Yeah, well into 3 figures these days. Yeah.
And also in the UK, we have actually the man who gave us the idea for the topic, the person who suggested the topic for this year's conversation and this year's podcast, also a member of the ICC, Ken Crossland. Ken, welcome to the Bing Crosby podcast we do every year.
Thank you, Anton. It's good to be here.
And it's also good to talk about, I think, one of the most important songs of the 20th century. And, I have always said as a way of starting the conversation today, we're going to be talking about White Christmas. And of course, when we think of White Christmas, this is one of the pictures that comes to mind. Bing Crosby with the Santa hat, this LP, or in this case, a CD, White Christmas. It's the most enduring song that Bing Crosby ever recorded. And I always say, when I talk about White Christmas, that, there are two people who created the idea of Christmas that even in the 21st century we do have in mind. One of them was British, the other one was American. One of them was Charles Dickens in the 19th century, and the other one was Bing Crosby in the 20th century. So really, when we think about music, when we think about Christmas, there are several things that come to mind. And of course, Bing Crosby and his rendition of White Christmas is one of them. And so today we're going to be talking about, and this is my first question for the three of you. Whoever wants to jump in first can do so, and then we'll go from there. I think the overarching question that we are asking here and that we're going to be trying to answer or at least discuss is, why is this song written by a Russian-born Jewish immigrant into the United States, Irving Berlin, White Christmas, such an enduring song? What makes this song so enduring? We're not going to be talking about the history of it because our fellow ICC member Pantelis Kavouras in Greece, one of the younger members of the ICC, did a really good presentation about the history and the different renditions of White Christmas by Bing Crosby through the years. we're more interested in talking about the sociology, so to speak, of White Christmas. And why do you think, Malcolm, Jason, Ken, why do you think that White Christmas is such an enduring song?
I'm waiting for the others to start.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's right.
Well, you've got to go back. Wartime was the thing that really made it happen. As we know, White Film Holiday in the big song was going to be careful, it's your heart. But with wartime and servicemen away from home, hearing those words, just like the Christmases I used to know, it brought back so many memories, and it took off very quickly. And stayed like that. Well, it was in the American charts for 20 years. It's incredible.
I think also we shouldn't overlook the simplicity of the song itself, the lyrics, the melody. You know, when Bing said like, "Oh, any average guy can sing like me when he's in the shower," that's a song in your head that you can sing in Bing's key, and you know the words because it's very straightforward. And I think the simplicity of the song has a lot to do with its endurance as well.
Mhm.
But it is an oddity, isn't it, that it should have such endurance, really. 80 years on now. Malcolm's right about the impact of the war, but that was primarily for American servicemen, I guess, serving in the Pacific. That wouldn't account for its endurance here in the UK, I don't think, because we don't have that same detachment from the idea of a white Christmas, because we kind of hope we might get one every year, as it were, back here. So I think it's one of those kind of cultural oddities, really, that you just can't explain. It clearly it had that lift in the war, and then it had a kind of snowball effect, if you'll forgive the pun. And it's that probably now which, more than anything, just keeps it going year in, year out.
It's nostalgia, isn't it? So many people heard it as a child, and when they hear the music now, it brings back lovely memories for them. I think nostalgia is a very strong influence. My kids will have had it brainwashed into them when they were little, and nowadays, Christmas, I'm sure they love to hear. I hope they still love to hear, because they will do.
Yeah. Well, you talk about the kids. I mean, for younger generations as well, there are other artists. I mean, we talked about BTS, but they could have picked any Christmas song, for a duet. But and Michael Bublé, another one. But they chose White Christmas, which again is introducing the song as well as Bing to new generations.
Yeah.
I
it's
think
interesting. It's interesting too that there is an alternative. Lots of alternative versions, but there's a very, very different version of White Christmas that appeared in the 50s, the Drifters version, which is one of those rare instances where you actually have another artist taking a song that is so much associated with a different artist and presenting it so differently, so that it sounds almost like a different song. The only other thing I can think of where that's happened was Ava Cassidy's treatment of "Somewhere Over the Rainbow," a song that was indelibly associated with Judy Garland, but sounded like a different song. But the interesting thing is that it's still the Crosby version that gets played, rather than the Drifters version. So that suggests to me that there is something about Bing and the association with the concept of Christmas that contributes to its legacy, rather than simply what's in the song itself.
Yeah, and it's the usual thing that happens every year, but White Christmas, the 1947 version, is 40th in the Billboard charts last week. There's two albums in the Billboard 200 charts. The Ultimate Christmas one, which has got various versions, it's on vinyl, it's on CD, it can be streamed. That's in the charts as well. It's incredible, really. Absolutely incredible.
I think that the combination of the song, the films, the TV shows, and for example, that album cover that you showed, Anton, makes the whole thing iconic, doesn't it? It's become totally iconic. You know, it represents an era, it represents a person, and it represents a time of year. You know, it's the first thing almost you think of, isn't it? Oh, it's Christmas, right? Great, it's going to be time to hear White Christmas again or watch the film again.
Well, it's
But I mean,
interesting that you say that, Jason, because and also going from something that Ken said before, because it is a song, White Christmas, that has transcended things like time and place and even culture, in the sense that this is a song that was popular, and maybe you have an idea about why this is, in places and with people for whom Christmas will never be white. In the sense that, for example, somebody listening to the song in Australia, they would not have a white Christmas. That's just an example of many places in the world. So what is it about the song that, going beyond the meaning, the actual literal meaning of the actual lyrics, it makes the song so appealing to people who may not have an actual close attachment to the image of Christmas that the song is presented, Ken?
Yeah, that might be one for Pantelis, come to think of it. I doubt if he's seen much snow in Athens. And his presentation, although it looked at the history and the origins of the song, he quite often homed in on the emotional performances
Mhm.
Bing gave. So again, why would somebody in a very hot climate in a different part of the world feel that emotion on a song like White Christmas?
Somebody that speaks a different language that's not English, for
Yes,
example.
but it was had no nostalgic connection for Pantelis in terms of being out in the street under street lights when it was snowing. His only nostalgic connection would be watching that film, for example, on TV when he was a child.
What about you, Anton? Because I don't suppose you got much snow in Spain, did you?
Well, no, I grew up in the northwest of Spain, which is the coldest part of Spain, where you do
All
see
right.
snow once in a while, but not in Vigo, because Vigo's right by the ocean. So that makes it more difficult for snow to actually fall. It does fall up on the mountains where the university is located, but not in the downtown area close to the harbor. To me, it has more to do with my interest in old movies through my uncle, who would play a lot of old movies for me, and musicals and noirs and Hitchcock and all sorts of things like that. And therefore, I was exposed to Bing Crosby through the movies at an early age. So there is that element of nostalgia, but also the fact that I just, became interested, and we will talk about this a little bit later on. I became interested in the entire work of Bing Crosby through the Christmas recordings, which is something that doesn't always happen. Sometimes people just see Bing as the Christmas singer, and we did an entire episode of this podcast years ago about Bing as a Christmas singer, and then they don't proceed from there. Um, but the nostalgia has to do with basically my childhood, but not necessarily the actual picture of Christmas physically on the lyrics. But yes, I would say the idea of Christmas as a celebration of certain things that are universal in human nature, family, love, friendliness, stuff like that.
But the people that were there at the time and were hearing that for the first time didn't have that nostalgic connection, did they? And yet it was still a big song at the time of its release and the time of Holiday Inn.
But your intro was interesting, Anton, because of course this image of Christmas and snow and white and so on, I guess starts with Dickens,
Hmm.
and so I wonder to what extent that White Christmas was simply playing into a worldwide concept that had been established 50 years before in literature.
Could be. Could be.
I think that's a very interesting question, because usually, the I would say even the commercial approach to Christmas starts in England in the 19th century with among other things, the works of Charles Dickens, and not just A Christmas Carol, because he wrote several other, Christmas texts that were not as popular as Christmas Carol in any way, but that were also part of what I think cemented this idea of Christmas that you're talking about. And I think it has to do, obviously, with a very westernized, very European view of Christmas that then is transferred into the movies when movies began to be made, adaptations of, for example, Dickens text, but also other Christmas movies, or movies that had connections with Christmas, like The Shop Around the Corner, and then, It's a Wonderful Life, and some of those classics. But the songs also present, I think they play, as you say, into that idea that was there before. And in many ways, the songs further that idea, because they're played every year. And so they start creating some kind of, I don't know how to call it, but maybe some kind of canon of what Christmas music should sound like and what it should talk about. And then, of course, there are deviations from that, like Mele Kalikimaka, which is talking about Christmas in Hawaii, and consciously departs from the idea of white Christmas, which I also find pretty interesting.
Mm. Yeah, I think the other thing is around other Christmas songs in comparison. Going back to what I said earlier about the melody and the simplicity, it's still difficult to find, even today, any other Christmas song that's been written in the interim to compare. I think even Sammy Khan, when he was asked to write a Christmas song, said, "Are you kidding? After White Christmas?"
The Secret of Christmas is quite good, though, isn't it?
Yes, it's probably the second best, isn't
it? There were Christmas songs though before White Christmas, and I think this is something that's interesting to talk about, because I feel like most of the, or at least I don't know if all, but most of the songs that were written about Christmas before were, some of them traditional, some of them not, but they were mostly religious in nature. Silent Night, about the birth of Christ, things like that. And it always has to do with this, Christian tradition. But with songs like White Christmas, that is not true anymore. These are secular songs about Christmas. Of course, they refer to Christmas, which is at its core a religious festivity, but they don't play up that religious nature of it. Do you think that had to do with the fact that Irving Berlin was Jewish, the fact that he was an immigrant in the United States, and he was more interested in the idea of Christmas than he was in the religious side of it? I don't know.
I think the clue might be in the verse that we discussed on the December meeting, because that does put the song into a completely different context, doesn't it? Understanding, the palm trees in, and I'm wishing it was, I was somewhere else where it's snowing at Christmas rather than being under the sun and under the palm trees here in Los Angeles.
I think that before we mention or we talk about this a little more, I should maybe read that verse so that we all have it in mind. The verse, as you all know, is an introduction to a song that often was left out by the singers, but that sometimes is very important to understand the rest of the song. And this is the case in White Christmas. The introduction or the verse goes, "The sun is shining, the grass is green, the orange and palm trees sway. There's never been such a day in Beverly Hills, LA. But it's December the 24th, and I am longing to be up north." And then we go into "I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas," and the part of the song that we all know and that has become really popular.
Because if you think of the 80 years that have elapsed since White Christmas was written and first recorded, it's probably fair to say that for the duration of Bing's life and perhaps a little beyond, there was part of the appeal of the song was probably part of the appeal of Bing as well. So that particularly as it got into the 60s and 70s and the TV shows, it became a sort of accepted custom that Bing would sing, and it would be sing White Christmas, and it would be the final song on the show, and that became part of the sort of a Christmas tradition. But I don't think that's now any longer the case. I mean, I think for the vast majority of people today, people aged under 50, who are hearing White Christmas at this time of year, that yes, they know it's Bing Crosby, but they don't know much more than that about this guy Bing Crosby. And one of the things we might perhaps get onto is in terms of Bing's wider legacy. Was White Christmas the best thing he ever did, or was it the worst thing he ever did? But I don't think anybody today. I don't think when it's played today, when it's rolled out, when you hear it all over the place, I don't think any of that recurrent popularity is because of an enduring sentiment for Bing anymore.
Mm-hmm. Maybe it has to do with, as usual, people say when we're talking about, a cultural phenomenon, follow the money. What is easy to market? What is easy to sell? And of course, Christmas, in a way, it's easy to sell because it recurs every year at the same time, and it's very predictable. So maybe that has something to do with why, Bing's Christmas recordings are better known than the rest of his output. But in order to kind of rephrase what Ken has very interestingly brought up, could we say, do you think, in your opinion, as Bing Crosby fans and Bing Crosby experts, which you are, of course, can we say that White Christmas is truly overshadowed? And I think that would be the word. Has White Christmas truly overshadowed the rest of Bing Crosby's output?
Which has now, and it's hard to imagine. Say he never recorded Christmas songs, what would be thought of? He'd be thought of like Ella Fitzgerald, wouldn't he? Nostalgia, but wouldn't have the same high impact he still has.
Yeah, if you ask somebody what comes to mind when you say Bing Crosby, obviously the first thing you'd say is White Christmas. So if you don't have White Christmas there, what do you say? High Society, the road movies.
Yes.
It's interesting though, Jason, that when you say that, you're pointing to the films and not so much to the records.
Yeah. So
film. Yes, it is an interesting topic, and it's one of those that we all have our views on. I mean, it's possible that if Bing had not recorded White Christmas and the Christmas songs, Bing would be totally forgotten now. Bing wouldn't be seen like Ella Fitzgerald or other of his contemporaries. He'd have gone because there is nothing in his repertoire that would have sustained his legacy. I'm not saying I necessarily believe that, but it's possible that would be the case. Alternatively, it could be that Bing would be remembered very differently for other things that he achieved that were arguably of more artistic significance than White Christmas. That's what's behind my question. Was it the worst thing or the best thing he ever did? We can't answer that. But I do think that it has for a long time now overshadowed and devalued what Bing achieved in the other aspects of his career, because there is no need for anybody to really explore any of that, because each year White Christmas comes around, like the sun, like the earth goes around the sun. It's predictable and it's regular and it's there, and there is no need for anyone else to look for anything else. Oh yeah, Bing Crosby, the guy who sang White Christmas, move on. And that is unfortunate, I think, from the point of view of Bing's legacy. I think there were lots of other reasons as well that again we may come on to as to which have contributed to that. In some ways, it's almost as though we have a sort of perfect storm here of things that have come together. The bottom line of which is that they have largely eradicated Bing from popular culture.
And this is what I meant earlier about the people that would have lived through that. So imagine they were the same age as Bing. So they'd lived through the early 30s and late 20s when all that innovative jazz singing was going on. And it would have blown people away, as it still does to me when I hear it now. And then when they would have got to 1947, 48, they wouldn't have been thinking of White Christmas. They'd have still been thinking about the great innovative sounds from 1931, 2 and 3.
Mm.
Mm.
The other thing I think was interesting, what you said, Ken, about if he hadn't recorded the song, so we would have had Holiday Inn, but without the song White Christmas. So we wouldn't have had the film White Christmas, and probably we wouldn't have had the Christmas TV shows because it was
definitely we would not have had
TV shows. Yeah.
No, that's right. And we wouldn't have had the film White Christmas, of course.
No, that's right. No.
What do you think, Malcolm? Do you believe that this White Christmas recording and then everything that went along with it overshadowed or has overshadowed the rest of Bing Crosby's output? And if so, what does that mean and why did it happen?
Well, it has overshadowed his other work, hasn't it, really? I mean, if he hadn't recorded White Christmas, he'd be remembered for songs like True Love, and Galway Bay and Swinging on a Star, wouldn't he? That's what he'd be remembered for. Of course, the big mistake he made career-wise, he didn't get into the LP market as Sinatra did. And that could have changed his whole career image if he'd done that.
But I think I agree. I think that's right. But I think it goes beyond just White Christmas, because whether it was Bing, whether it was Jack Kapp, whether it was Larry Crosby, or whether it was a combination of the three of them, your point, Anton, about following the money. I mean, the Crosby enterprises, as it were, commercialized Christmas to a far greater extent, probably, than any other entertainer. I mean, if you look at the number of Christmas songs that Bing recorded, all of which have kind of built this foundation. The White Christmas sits at the top of it. But yeah, all of those.
And those are just some.
Yeah, that's right. Then and it always came back. There always was a Christmas album with Sinatra. There was the Time to Be Jolly. Christmas was there was the early '60s Christmas album. You never went 3 or 4 years without you got something new for Christmas from Bing. And of course, what that then I think created or fueled was that for the last 15 years of Bing's life, you had this Bing Christmas show, which was probably the dominant thing in terms of his television career. But what you saw on those Christmas shows was this aging singer, not really pushing the boundaries. I know there were 1 or 2 things that we've looked at in terms of individual shows, the Trial of Santa Claus and stuff like that, and the O. Henry thing, which were outstanding. But actually, for the general public's memory of those shows, it's Bing, it's the untalented family alongside him, it's the familiar rollout of a couple of guests and so on. It's Bing becoming more and more this aged cardigan-clad singer that nobody pays any attention to. And it was Christmas that fueled and built all of that, I believe.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely right. Yeah.
I think one thing that Ken is mentioning that kind of brings something to mind that is somehow related. I wonder how much of the way Bing Crosby is viewed today, 50 years roughly after his passing, right, has to do with Bing's own personality because I feel like there was a moment in Bing's career where he stopped caring about pushing the boundaries anymore.
Mhm.
You were talking about him not getting into the LP market and that kind of thing. There was a moment I feel like Bing Crosby began to feel like he didn't have anything else to prove anymore, and he just wanted to, have a nice life and just live a relaxed life, still doing work and still making movies and stuff. But I don't think he had the drive that, for example, Frank Sinatra did and others to remain current after rock and roll hit. I don't know if that has something to do with it. Whereas Frank Sinatra wanted to stay current and made records that tried to appeal and in some cases appealed to a younger audience. Think of the huge hit of Strangers in the Night, which he hated in 1966. But Bing Crosby was not interested in any of that. He was more interested in what you were talking about, doing the TV shows, playing golf and doing this and doing that, but not necessarily being in the limelight the entire time.
No, he wasn't hungry, was he? He'd done it, seen it, got the T-shirt. He hadn't got that drive to do it. I mean, people like Como, for instance, not only did he do his annual Christmas shows, but he started giving concert tours, something Bing never did till the last two or 3 years of his life. Bing wasn't hungry. The drive had gone. He'd lost interest, really. Instead of being Bing Crosby, he was Harry Crosby. That's what had happened. He reverted back to being Harry Crosby.
Mm. I think let's not forget as well that the fact that he was older and he was the first, he was there at the birth of those, like the
Mm.
recording, the birth of using microphones, the birth of films with new songs that the Tim Panelli songwriters were writing, and radio too. He was there at the birth of radio, and he saw all those through. It's like, what else have I got to prove? Even TV, we know he was reluctant to get into TV, but eventually he did. And really, I don't. There's not any other performer or person that was there at that time and was there in 1977 that had been so successful in all of those fields, in radio, in television, in recording. Even the only other people that were around at that time and really gave birth to their particular fields was, of course, Louis Armstrong at the same time. And so there you go. We could be having that conversation about why is Louis Armstrong remembered more for What a Wonderful World than he was for the Hot Fives and Hot Sevens that changed the face of jazz music, in the late 1920s. And the other person, of course, was Chaplin, who completely gave birth to a new industry. And we wouldn't have film, never mind film comedy, as it is today, if we hadn't had Chaplin more than 100 years ago. But Bing was the only person that was there at the beginning of records, of radio, of film and TV. So it's understandable that by the time we get to 1965 to 70, you're going to be thinking, what else is there I've got to do?
But maybe even before 1965 and 7.
I think it is. I mean, I think it's one element of this perfect storm. Malcolm said that Bing never got into LPs really, and which is true. But if you listen to the vast majority of Bing's repertoire pre 1955, none of it sounds modern. It's mono recording. Even up until the early 50s, there was a style change. There was a vocal backing. You hear it on some of the early 50s Christmas records. This choral backing, singing in a way that you would never now hear a choral backing sing. A very quite a high pitched choir, and it's the John Scott Trotter arrangements and so on. They are all of a bygone era, and unfortunately, the world of music, the technology, and the performers started to change dramatically around about 1955, just at the point where, as Malcolm says, Bing was losing interest, or losing energy, or losing drive, or whatever that might be. Had those two things happened 10 years away either side, it might look very different now. But it just happened to 1955 coincided with a dramatic change in the music business at the same time as Bing started to revert to being a man who enjoyed his golf and his fishing more than his singing.
And the irony, of course, is when you did go into the LP market, the few times were very, very successful. Like the Bregman album must have sounded to people that were hearing that for the first time, like Bing followers in, what was it, 1956, how modern that must have sounded compared to everything he'd released
Yes.
before. And then the Bing with the beat, like, puts you right back into the groove, doesn't it? I mean, that's the Dixieland style, yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the duet album with Rosemary Clooney was probably the best duet album of the 50s.
Fancy meeting you here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. But on the other side of that coin, pre 1955, there's very little that anybody except us, as it were, for the last 25 or 30 years would actually want to listen to. And of course, the technology point is true. Again, you look at Sinatra. There's lots of TV stuff of Sinatra, sort of 60s, 70s, color TV, decent quality.
The specials, yeah.
The specials and so on. Again, Bing's best years were before all of that. There's the equivalent is the radio, but again, who wants to listen to all radio shows apart from us? And again, the films were largely in black and white. High Society leaps out, beautiful color presentation, etc., etc. But Riding High and all of those others are ancient when you look at them, simply because of the technology that underpin them. Again, now a factor of time. Mid-50s, from the mid-50s on, most films were in color. Pre mid-50s, most films were black and white. Again, Bing's the wrong side of that particular watershed.
And incredibly, we have Road to Bali in colour, and then Road to Hong Kong, they make in black and white.
Yes.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, even some of the bigger productions, like, I guess, Country Girl, Man on Fire, they were all still black and white, weren't they?
Yeah. And then, of course, we had Stay One For Me. What a classic that was.
But I think, Anton, your point about Bing losing interest at some point and not wanting to push the boundaries, I think it's worth pausing on that, because one of the other factors in this discussion that interests me is, to what extent does this personality that was created for Bing in the mid-30s, the KMH personality, this what Gary Giddins called everyman.
Yes.
And it was and we know that it was a long way from being the natural Bing, but this affable, easygoing character who didn't push himself, who didn't try and be anything other than the sort of the average guy, who tried to be the comfortable neighbor, who tried not to be the standout, tried not to be the featured individual, the opposite to what Sinatra's natural instincts were. And Bing kept that personality going, didn't it? Right through to the very end. He was a product. It was a phenomenally successful product of its time. But it mitigated against Bing creating a legacy for himself as a performer, because the geniality, averageness of the personality that he created or was created for him required him to almost downplay all of the artistic high points that he'd reached before.
And related to that, Ken, and I also ask it to the rest of you, from the point of view of marketing that product when time goes by, how much more difficult do you think it is to market an everyman sort of personality as opposed to a certain myth of, the swagger of Sinatra and Las Vegas and all that sort of thing, which, Bing Crosby never had. Bing Crosby could have chosen, like Elvis, like like Sinatra and so many others to perform in Vegas and become, another huge hit there possibly. I don't know, but he never did that. And so how much more difficult do you think it is to in the 21st century and even towards the end of the 20th century to sell from the point of view of marketing this kind of everyman persona, which I think is a great way to put it, as Gary Giddens did.
And I think that self-deprecating everyman, the golfer, the hunter, the fisherman, is really what made Bing appealing to the male listeners, whereas Sinatra being that kind of bit more virile and the swagger probably had a lot more female admirers, or buying his LPs. And I really think that Bing was like the man's man. In terms of, we all wanted to sing like that. We all wanted to spend our weekends on the golf course or out fishing away from it all. So I think that leaning on and extending that side of his personality was absolutely deliberate, and I think it's what also sustained a big male following for his work.
Yeah, I agree. But I think, Anton, that the whole idea that if you create this sort of everyman personality, it is so much about being a person of the time that you are. It being the epitome of what people want to see in your time. But once that time is gone, then it's very difficult to see how you sustain that sort of character, because there are no myths that can be built up around that character. Whereas Sinatra and Dean Martin and the Rat Pack and so on exist now in memory largely on a lot of the myths surround their Las Vegas days and so on, which curiously were never there whilst Dean Martin was alive. They've become much stronger since Dean Martin passed away. The exact opposite of what's happened with Bing.
And not to mention that movies that have to do with their Vegas days or that were filmed during their Vegas days, like Ocean's 11, for example, have been remade, and even sequels have been released, like Ocean's 12, and it has almost been repackaged into a new or for a new era or a new set of viewers, even if, of course, those viewers from the 21st century will not share 100% all the values that the original movie actually contained, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Now this has not happened with Bing Crosby. There's not, and none of his movies have been remade into an Ocean's 12 kind of product, right? It's just all I'm trying to say is that I feel like that kind of, as you say, Ken, it is very much of its time. But it's not only that it's very much of its time. It's just that it's very difficult to transpose to a different time. Whereas some other myths are a lot easier to sell when the times change.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it may be that there was a genius behind, whether it was Jack Kapp or Carroll or Larry Crosby, whoever it might be, that if you kind of picture the scene in 1935. Here you have Bing, who's been this revolutionary white male singer, this first white jazz singer, the man who's just simply put himself on a pantheon that no one else can be anywhere near in terms of vocal ability. How durable, though, would that have been? What was the genius of Jack Kapp and others to say, okay, well, now that's got us to where we are, but we actually need a radio personality of this that will create this individual. We actually need somebody to get out there and own Christmas and actually own Hawaii and own Irish songs and own cowboy songs and all of these other things that Jack Kapp moved Bing towards. And then, somewhere from the film's point of view, we need something that gives us a film vehicle. We need, the road, the partnership with Hope, all of the knockabout kind of stuff. these may all have been acts of genius in 1935 because they created an individual, a person who was enduringly popular for the next 40 years and even well beyond the end of his life was still an iconic figure. But ultimately, it's time limited in terms of how long those things will endure. And that's what we see now. And the one thing that is the exception to all of that is White Christmas.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Yeah.
If we look at how quickly that everyman persona, the strolling, laid back, great neighborly guy, how quickly that persona developed in the movies, probably at the time of the Senate films, the seed was sown for that persona. And by the time we get to like 1940, 1, 2, and 3, it's already completely fully rounded. And I believe there's only one person responsible for that, and that was Bing himself. I know he used to say, "Oh, I always just play myself," but probably he was 85% of the character was really himself.
Well, and it was
Well,
working
they always say, of
financially.
course, being modelled, he's everything on his dad, didn't he? The happy-go-lucky character in films was his dad, whereas the private Bing was like his mother. That's what they've always said there, haven't they?
But it's something that we see in the industry all the time, in the sense that, if that kind of persona in the films and also elsewhere was working, why change it? I've always thought, for example, that Elvis Presley could have been a much better actor than he became, but I think it's because he just became entrenched in, this situation where he was making the same movie over and over again, and because it was working financially, even if it wasn't artistically, right? It was working commercially, but not artistically, but nobody cared because that's what we need to do now in order to make money. And I doubt that Bing Crosby or any of his contemporaries were thinking long term about their musical legacy. I remember years ago, and this is more or less related to this. I had the chance in Nashville when I was hosting a classic country music radio show on a station there, WRVU, to interview Billy Walker from Texas, the tall Texan, the masked singer of country songs, huge singer in the 50s and 60s, songs like Cross the Brazos at Waco and Circumstances and Charlie's Shoes, big #1 country hits. And I asked him, when you made this records, what were you trying to accomplish with these records? And he said, well, we were just trying to make ends meet. We just wanted to make some money, to be able to survive. We weren't thinking along the lines of cultural legacy or anything like that. So my guess is this is the same with somebody like even Bing Crosby, who was a much more important singer than Billy Walker.
Yeah. I think what you said about Elvis was quite important because had he changed tacks and tried to do something more dramatic or something different, that's not what his supporters and his fans went to the cinema to see. They wanted to see that the Elvis that they knew, and maybe that was the case with Bing in the 40s as well. He stuck with that easygoing everyman persona because he knew that's what people wanted to see, what brought them to the cinema.
And at the same time, he was doing things that were kind of not necessarily unheard of, but not very common, as, for example, playing a Catholic priest and getting an Academy Award with that. So that's quite interesting to think that, he did certain things, even, I would say, inadvertently.
But even Father O'Malley was just an extension of that same Crosby personality, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm.
I agree. It was a big step to actually play that on screen, but it was the same piece of marketing.
Yeah, I think it plays.
He even played that down, didn't he? Again, that self-deprecating part. You remember the interview with Barbara Waters when she asked him about that, and he said, "Well, he didn't really deserve it. It was, it was just, I'd made a few records, and it was wartime, and we had this, and so it was just kind of given to me by default, really." It's the kind of approach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I think also besides all of this, since we're discussing how Bing is remembered, uh, roughly, half a century after his passing, we're obviously also dealing with the aspect of time and the passage of time itself. I think that's also a factor. And with the three of you being from the UK, I wondered. I was talking to my wife about it this morning as we were having breakfast, and she knew we were recording this. The passage of time itself is important because if you think, for example, of, British entertainment, I do wonder, how many stars of British entertainment is still remembered today from the pre-Beatles era. And that has to do not necessarily with the quality of the music or the art involved, but also with certain changes in context that have to do with the passing of time that makes it a lot easier for people to remember, say, John Lennon and Paul McCartney rather than, Tommy Steele and Marty Wilde and
Yeah.
George Formby, right? So,
Mm.
how important do you think the passage of time is? Could we think that in some cases, a lot of these popular artists from a specific time period will necessarily be forgotten? Is there something different about Bing Crosby and, say, the big classical composers that will be remembered, millennia after their passing? It's a difficult question, I know, but that's something that kind of, got me thinking. Why is it that, for example, most people will not be able to mention the name today, the name of, for example, a British or even an American in some cases, um, um, artist pre-1960?
Berlin, Doris Day, I suppose. Those names still have an impact, don't they? Berlin, Doris Day.
Yeah,
No?
but they were still kind of they were still evident, weren't they? Every now and then they would, despite their age, still crop up on something on TV or an interview or something. So the example I use here is Bing's last Christmas movie. So nobody under 50 knows who Stanley Baxter is or was, and he's still around. He's still around, okay? And I remember as a kid, his specials on TV in the
Yeah.
1970s were big viewing specials, weren't they? Big spectaculars. But as I say, ask anybody under 50 now who Stanley Baxter is, and they wouldn't have a clue.
No, that's right.
Mm. It's interesting. I think you make a good point, Anton, and just picking up Vera Lynn. That is a name that endures, but she's kind of got a White Christmas equivalent, hasn't she? It's the Wall. It's the We'll Meet Again, or
Yeah.
maybe it's the White Cliffs of Dover. But it's War, the Sweetheart of the Forces. So think of World War II music, Vera Lynn. Christmas, White Christmas, Bing Crosby. It's the same. Anne Shelton. Historians will tell you that Anne Shelton was bigger than Vera Lynn during World War II. But now, who's Anne Shelton? She's disappeared. And so maybe the passage of time is it. I was thinking about some of the American names: Clark Gable, Gary Cooper. Massive stars, but how are they now remembered in the States?
But if you add to that somebody like James Stewart, It's a Wonderful Life, what else? People have just been, I've no idea.
Yeah.
Just remembered for one thing and a career that was 60 years long.
Yes.
But could it be, Malcolm, that the important thing is that maybe there are things that some artist has done that are so iconic that they become just synonymous with that piece of art. And therefore, even though there could be remakes of It's a Wonderful Life, we will always think of the referent, which is, James Stewart in that case, or, I'm sure there have been millions of versions of White Christmas, but we will always have that referent of Bing Crosby. Does it have to do with just the way things are marketed, or do you think that there's, a different reason besides that?
I don't know.
I mean, it's a very difficult question, but it's something that I often think about. you could make a slew of wonderful albums, but unless there's one thing that stands out commercially, the public at large are not going to be remembering this this
What?
this
How
artist.
are you going to remember? How are you going to remember Tony Bennett?
Well, I was just going to say the same about Sinatra 50 years after his death, say the equivalent of where Bing is now. What are people going to remember or think of when you say Frank Sinatra? He doesn't have a white Christmas. Okay, he has My Way, probably.
Yes,
But
New York, New York.
Sinatra has the myth. Sinatra has the many people now would tell you that Sinatra was the first great popular singer, that he started it all. Not proper music historians, but that is the sort of word on the street. There's that myth around Sinatra that will probably certainly keep his name alive. I mean, the one hope for Bing is the music historians. Is there any possibility that Bing might be looked on in the same way as the classic composers? And let me just read you something which is a good hope. This is from a book called Electric Shock. I don't know whether you've come across it, by Peter Doggett, who's written books about Bowie, and he's basically a rock music journalist. For anyone born in the 1950s or afterwards, it is difficult to square that reckoning of Crosby's talent with the distant memory of a middle-aged entertainer who seemed to lack Sinatra's panache, Presley's physicality, or Dylan's insight, to name but three hip white persons from subsequent eras. Bing seemed to the rock and roll generation to be a showbiz smoozer who exhibited a strange distance from his peers whilst masquerading as their closest friend. Then he died, and various family members testified to his shortcomings as a husband and father. While Sinatra's appeal and presence merely multiplied with age and beyond, Crosby felt, I don't say sounded really, because who was listening to him in 1977? Crosby felt like the most prominent member of a breed that had been rendered irrelevant by the arrival of rock and roll. The rock and roll generation, and this writer as its guilty representative, didn't know what it was missing. Bing Crosby wasn't merely the ultimate crooner, a category that soon would become a subject of similar derision, but arguably the most influential singer of the 20th century. His celebrity fans would have concurred, among them Frank Sinatra, Elvis Presley, and Bob Dylan.
And it's very well put. It's really well put.
When did
And I
that book
think
come out?
It came out.
You ought to use that paragraph in your next article.
Yeah, 2015. 2015.
Yeah, I think we're getting then into when with this passage, which with which I am very much in agreement. I think we're getting into the idea of what each generation does to the previous generation, right? Because then the music of my generation is going to be the real thing, and it's going to be more important than everything that came before. In some cases, that is the approach that is taken. I've never understood among music critics why the jazz critics had to bash rock and roll almost every time, and why the rock critics had to bash everything that came before rock and roll. Maybe it was because of that famous John Lennon quote of "Before Elvis, there was nothing." No,
Yes.
before Elvis, you don't remember anything, I would say to John if he were in front of me. Right? There's a difference there. But I think it's important because even in academic writing, this happens all the time. Music historians who concentrate on, let's say, rock and roll, and then they just dismiss everything that came before as just bland music without understanding that every music has its context as well. That's something very important to me when people are looking at cultural artifacts from the past only from the point of view of the present. That becomes a disaster. You're just not understanding them correctly.
But people still have to be aware or made aware, don't they? They have to pick up a book or a history book and read about that. Or, I mean, we have a great opportunity, don't we, with things like the podcast here and the YouTube recordings, because that's made available to everybody, and Bing's legacy, we can see, he's not going to die with our generation. Look at the youngsters, from Anton and other people that are joining those calls and joining the club, and they have access to everything that Bing produced and every book written about him just by opening a laptop and not even having to get out of bed. I used to have to go to second-hand record shops all around London the day out. And so, and the access has never been easier if people are going to take the time, to discover something new.
I'd say that's possibly true. I think Jason is overlooking my thinning hair and little white, hair there on the side. But besides that, that also actually carries into another question that I had here that I was thinking about based on what Ken had sent me when he proposed this topic. How do you think that the internet has played into the way that Bing is remembered today? Because I think this is important. All I would think is, I was born and lived a big part of my life before the internet, and I did go to those secondhand record shops, and I did read the newspaper and not online, and listen to BBC World Service to practice my English and on the shortwave, that is, and but my daughter, for example, who's 11, she's born into a very different time, technologically and therefore culturally as well. Um, what do you think, or in what way the internet do you think has played into the way Bing is remembered in 2024, which is when we're recording this?
So if we take, for example, YouTube, pretty much every day I have a look on YouTube and look at what new Bing Crosby videos have been posted, and there are pages and pages, and it's who's doing this? Lots of people are posting Bing old videos, new videos, references, and you think, so where are they finding this? And they're actually taking the time to post this daily on YouTube. It's not just ICC members that are doing this.
The
Mm,
internet, the internet in some ways has brought Bing back, hasn't it? Because
yes.
uh, as you say, the YouTube, but also uh, the recordings which are streamed and suddenly are back in the charts again because of streaming.
Yeah.
If you're buying physical records, they wouldn't be back in the charts.
No, absolutely. I was just going to make the same point. Um, yeah, it's it's got to be something that works in every performer's favor. I suppose the thing against it is that the amount of stuff that's out there now is totally unlimited.
Hmm.
So you know, Jason, you're finding every day posting about Bing. If you were looking for Laurel and Hardy, Charlie Chaplin, Tony Bennett, whatever it might be, it'd be the same thing, wouldn't it? There'd be just
Yeah,
stacks and stacks and stacks of it.
yeah. The technology for collectors, if you like, as we probably don't call ourselves collectors anymore. But you guys were the same as me, dreaming that one day I'd have a little box that had all of Bing's records on there. And now I have it on my phone. Pretty much every record that Bing made is downloaded on my phone today, and you can have it wherever you go. It's completely portable. And the other thing, of course, is I was made aware of this. I've been putting together a presentation for the Manchester Jazz Society for January, and it's about Bix, Beiderbecke, and Bing together. Okay, and of course, the quality of the digital sounds from those records from 1927, 28, 29. Imagine at the time when people were listening to them on a Victrola on the 78, they couldn't have sounded anything like they do today. So not only do we have that access by having everything on a little black box in our pocket, but we have the best sounding versions of those records that ever existed. We're a very
But
lucky generation, I think.
but don't you think there is one of the again the other side of that particular coin is that the availability of so much so easily
Mm.
has contributed to um, a much higher level of superficiality now that people are happy to exist in.
But superficiality in the sense of how you receive or analyze those
Yeah,
contents.
so for example, like we went to a thing at the golf club on Saturday night, Swing Into Christmas, two tribute singers to the Rat Pack. They did some Christmas stuff, and they did some other non-Christmas stuff. And Bing was never mentioned through the whole evening. But there were a couple of things that just sort of struck me in the evening. One was when one guy stood up to say, "I'm going to sing one of the great Christmas songs now." He said, "By Nat King Cole," and he sang the Christmas song.
Mm-hmm.
But what he meant was recorded by Nat King Cole. But I said to Linda at the end, everybody in that room now has gone away thinking Nat King Cole wrote the Christmas song.
Yes.
He then said, "We'll have a break from the Christmas thing, and we just do one or two Rat Pack numbers. We're going to do one of the real Sinatra, real treasures, Cheek to Cheek." Yeah. So again, everybody walks out, "Oh, Cheek to Cheek, yeah, it's a Frank Sinatra song." Step one would have been to say it was Fred Astaire's song. Step two would have been to say it was an Irving Berlin song. But that level, that's where we exist in so many parts of societies, because that's so freely available, and you could actually you can go out and you can easily back it up and find Nat King Cole singing the Christmas song. And we don't dig deeper. The general population, I think, in the UK doesn't dig deeper. We're happy to take along these things that are given to us. There's no challenge or thought. Somebody would say something about a Dickens novel and it would be taken. Nobody bothered to go and actually read the book and see what Dickens actually was writing about.
I think it's
the irony of the Christmas song, of course, is the Christmas song was written by Mel Torme, but how many people remember Mel Torme?
Exactly. Yeah, who's Mel Torme? Yeah.
But the important...
Ken, Saturday night, were you sitting there fuming? Or,
No, I enjoyed it. It was a good show, but I was more intrigued and just interested in observing the kind of level that it was operating at.
It's interesting what you say, Ken, for two reasons. One of them is that was a very that is a practice where you're describing very much unlike Bing and Frank, because Bing and Frank always gave credit to the singer, to the songwriters, to the arrangers. Sinatra would sing a song and would say, "This is a marvelous Cole Porter song."
Yes.
Arrangement by Nelson Riddle, or something like that. Bing would do the same on his radio shows, and and that's very much unlike what they themselves would do at the time.
Yes.
But what you're saying about the vast amount of stuff that's out there is also very important, because on the other side of this, despite the fact that there is so much available out there, I feel like the algorithm is part of the problem, because the algorithm is thought about, or it's presented in such a way that keeps you from learning new things, but you are showered with the same type of stuff that the algorithm thinks that you already like. So, if you like Nat King Cole, they're going to send you, more records that sound like Nat King Cole, maybe Charles Brown, or, somebody like that. If you like Bing, then maybe you get something by, another crooner from the era. I doubt that Dick Todd is one of them. But, what I'm saying is that the algorithm kind of goes against your opportunities to discover new things, because everything is so compartmentalized in order to be able to sold better.
And it's easy because because all of the supporting stuff is there at the touch of a button.
Yeah. It's interesting what you said about the Rat Pack or those singers, because 10 years ago, I saw the Rat Pack Christmas show. I thought how great it would have been to have had a Bing Crosby impersonator guest star or something in there, but no, and it finished with Frank Sinatra singing White Christmas.
Well, to me, one of the best Bing Crosby, Christmas TV appearances is the one with Frank, where they sing together and they sing, Jingle Bells, and they end with White Christmas. They're together in the house. And they're, I think Sinatra cracks the joke about bring some pizza or something like that. That to me is great, because I have always wanted to have an actual duet album between Bing and Frank Sinatra. And that never happened, obviously, for many reasons that we could go into, but at least we have, that kind of show where the two of them are singing together, and you see two singing traditions which are slightly different, or in some cases very different, but that have points in common. I think there is more when you listen to them sing together. There's more that brings them together than actually sets them apart. Because obviously, Bing Crosby was part of the inspiration of Frank Sinatra when it came to becoming a popular singer himself. So, I think that's one of the good things about those TV shows, is that they afforded opportunities for duets that never materialized in the studio.
Yeah. But is it just Bing fans or supporters that when you watch something like Well Did You Ever, the High Society duet, that your eyes are always on Bing? Our Sinatra followers just have their eyes on Sinatra, because you see what I'm getting at on, on that. Like, that you've got the age difference, you've got the elder statesman, and you've got the new virile singer, and yet you can't take your eyes off Bing, even when he's just sitting in the armchair flicking through a magazine, and Sinatra's all animated.
That could be true, but what I'm really interested in those cases is the interplay between the two of them. How does that work or not work? It's just like when I listened to that album that Bobby Darin and Johnny Mercer made, Two of a Kind. I think it's a great album, but it is great because of their rapport and because of the interaction between the two of them. And I may be looking more at Bing, but I do like to think about how, the quips, how they, improvise this or that. And, I think Sinatra was a good improviser as well. Sometimes, people don't give him credit for that. But of course, Bing Crosby was born into that. And he actually pushed the envelope in the 1930s by doing that. And I also had, a question regarding this written down. When Artie Shaw said that Bing Crosby was the hippest white man on earth, or something like that.
Yeah.
Do you think there was a time when Bing stopped being the hippest white man on in the music business? And if so, around what time do you think that happened?
I think there definitely was, and I would probably say around about 1931, 1932 would be when it stopped.
So really early on.
Yeah, really early on. Maybe you might say get to 1934, but as soon as Bing started his radio career, he stopped meeting that. He stopped being that person that Artie Shaw was talking about.
I think at probably the same time, maybe a little bit later as well, getting into the feature films as well. His persona changed, and apart from a few occasions where he did, like a Rhythm on the River or whatever, where he did a kind of hip jazz rendition, but the rest of the time he seemed at that point he'd moved away from being a very hip jazz singer to being a pop singer of popular melodies, really.
It could have been when he had the problem with his throat, because there was a rawness to his voice, I think, in around 30, 31, early 32. And although there was the vocal range was still there in 33 and 34 and so on, there was a start of a more mellow kind of treatment of things, and again that may have been part of it. But for me, it would certainly be somewhere in the first 3 or 4 years of the 1930s would be when he stopped being that.
What do you think, Malcolm?
Oh, I think it was Jack Cap's fault. Jack Cap cut out all kinds of stuff to try and hit the middle market, put him into cowboy songs, Hawaiian, all that kind of stuff. And I think a lot of the change was due to Jack Cap influencing him.
I don't think it was such a cliff edge as well. I think there was a transition there, and for me, it's probably towards the end of the 30s, because if you think of the records that he made with his brother, Bob Crosby's band, I mean, like You've Been a Beautiful Baby, what was that, 1938? Yes. 38, so I think maybe around that time for me, but I think it definitely was a transition rather than just a cliff edge change,
Yeah.
I've always thought that Bing's, the diversity, of approaches to different genres. Him singing all those Hawaiian songs and Latin flavored songs and cowboy songs was actually a plus in his career. I think it diversified not just the audience, but also part of his not just his appeal in the audience, but also his legacy. We can think of Bing Crosby as one of the first, or the first, maybe, major pop star that took a country song, which was called hillbilly back then, and made it, into a popular song and helped, push the respectability of country music forward.
Thing that amazes me about Bing's country songs is if you didn't know Bing and you'd never heard him and you listened to the 1963, I think, great country hits, you'd just think, oh, that's an old country and western singer. Because that's exactly how he sounds. He doesn't sound like you would have expected Bing, the pop singer to have sounded doing a country song. He actually
Mhm.
sounds like a seasoned country and western singer.
With a cold.
Mm.
With a cold, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
he had been singing those types of country songs for a long time by that point. And even
Yeah.
country music had changed into a more Nashville sound, oriented style in those days. Ken.
There's also an issue here though about how long these performers live.
Mhm.
I mean, I can give a couple of examples. I always wonder if Buddy Holly had not got on the plane that night, would anybody remember Buddy Holly now the way they do? Because there were signs that he'd already passed his peak. The stuff he'd been doing in the last year or so of his life wasn't of the same quality as the earlier stuff he'd done. Would he have just faded out and been remembered as somebody who was kind of turning out in the 70s as a kind of 50s rock star and so on? The other example is they call him the British singer. He was actually South African, but Al Bowley.
Mhm.
People say Al Bowley was the sort of nearest thing in Britain to the American crooners in the 30s, when he was killed in an air raid. But he was totally washed up by the time that he died. His career was on the rocks. He was struggling for work. He was singing as a touring around with a guitarist. Again, had he lived on, he would have just faded away into obscurity. But he was killed, and that becomes an event, and that the drawbridge comes down, as it were, and he becomes a legend because of the obviously unfortunate nature of his passing. Bing had 40 years after 1930 to sustain a life and a career, and it's inevitable if you're going to do that successfully that you're going to have to find a way that finds that middle ground and occupies it and endures. And he did that phenomenally well. And that, Malcolm's point that it was Jack Kapp who created it, but again comes back to my point: was that Jack Kapp's mistake, or was that Jack Kapp's genius?
Yeah, and I always imagine that of Elvis as well. Obviously dying at a young age. So what would Elvis have done for the next
Yeah,
25 years? Would he have
Mhm.
done Sinatra and just carried on touring and singing the same songs? Would he
probably.
have changed tack?
Yeah.
You may think about the same thing with John Lennon, right? What would
Yes.
John Lennon have done in the 80s?
Yes.
Would he be doing duets with, I don't know, David Bowie, or would the
Yeah.
Beatles get back together? Would they tour? I mean,
Yeah.
it's hard to tell, but obviously, John Lennon's popularity is not solely based on the fact that he was killed in 1980, but that's part of the myth as well,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so there are certain things that happen to people's lives that sometimes are better remembered than the actual things that they did
Well,
while they were alive.
the ones that die young don't have the opportunity to foul it up later on, do they?
Exactly. Yes, there
True.
is that. Yeah.
In the
But
case of Buddy Holly, I'm sure he'd be remembered through, the Beatles versions of his songs, maybe even more so than through his own song recordings of the song. Same thing with Carl Perkins, for example, right? And who actually was born in the city where I live. And, the Beatles recorded a lot of his songs. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
people who have heard of Carl Perkins is because they know the Beatles and they know their versions of the songs. So, but how many people know that John Lennon was inspired by Bing Crosby's Please in order to write Please
Yeah.
Please Me, which was a big hit record in the early 60s, right?
Yeah. And you mentioned about cross generation of duets there, and I often wonder if Bing was responsible for that phenomenon when he sang the duet with David Bowie, and after that you had like Sinatra making duet albums with youngsters, Tony Bennett with Amy Winehouse, and I just wondered if was there any cross generation duets before Bing and Bowie did that?
That's a good question.
I can't think of one.
I really can't, but I mean, it's possible that there is that there are some, but maybe not that became as powerful and as popular as that particular duet with Bing Crosby and David Bowie, which again brings us to almost full circle to the theme at the very beginning of our conversation, which is Christmas. Again, it's not any song that they did together, but it's Little Drummer Boy and Peace on Earth, a Christmas song on a Christmas special. That was almost like the Christmas special itself was almost like a tradition in American television at the time, as you were saying before.
Yeah.
I think a lot of this, to wrap up the conversation, has to do with the fact that whatever we think about when we're talking about cultural artifacts as these, and then the passage of time when we're trying to add the historical perspective to it, it's usually a double-edged sword, as in the case of the Christmas specials. They became a tradition, and Bing was known for them, but then at the same time, if he was only known for them, then everything else becomes overshadowed by that. At least he will be remembered for something, some could say, but others would say, well, he made better records than the first snowfall of the year or Christmas, or maybe he made better records than White Christmas. In fact, they didn't think, as you said before, that White Christmas was going to be the hit from Holiday Inn, which, by the way, I don't know if I showed, but I do have a copy on DVD of Holiday Inn right here. And many times I have said that Holiday Inn is not a movie that is rerun as much as White Christmas on American television come the end of each year. There are some reasons for that, but we don't need to go into those. But, at least we have White Christmas, and White Christmas is rerun, and people will always remember Bing Crosby for White Christmas. I want to ask you in closing just two very quick things. One of them is, have you heard that new electronic duet between this Korean singer V from the boy band or K-pop band BTS and Bing Crosby? And if so, what did you think? What is your assessment of this new artifact?
Well, it's nothing special at all, I don't think. I don't think V's got a particularly good voice. But there, who cares if it goes to the top of the charts? Millions have listened to it already. Fine. I've never heard of BTS. I've never heard of V. Anyone else heard of BTS? I've had huge hits.
No,
I had, but I have an 11-year-old. Not that she's a fan of BTS, but she has heard the name, and therefore I have heard the name as well. But if not, I never would have, really.
Very successful tours.
I agree with you. It's a very bland rendition, actually. And we were discussing just before you guys joined about which version of Bing's that was, but it seems to have been a radio show, probably from the early 50s. But that duet is not going to be as memorable as the Bing and Bowie duet, for example.
It was much more conventional than I expected it to be. I don't know what I expected, but I didn't. It just sounded like Bing singing with another crooner of his era, almost. And in terms of the style of the record, there was nothing about it that took the sort of liberties, I guess, that I thought it might have.
I have a similar view. I think that obviously, out of respect for Bing and for, the style of the song originally, is probably the reason why the singer V is trying to sound more like a crooner than himself, and that I think brings down the quality of the recording or of the duet, because I tend
Mm.
to disagree with. And this is almost an heresy to say this, but I tend to disagree with Irving Berlin, when he criticized Elvis's version of White Christmas, that he didn't like it, that he should be banned, and, that kind of thing. No, I think it's nice that Elvis Presley and the Drifters, for that matter, which, Elvis was basing his version on, did something different with White Christmas. It's good when Sinatra sings Jingle Bells, and it starts with "I love those JINGLE bells." It's nice to hear something different. So I would have expected V to kind of do his own take on White Christmas and kind of try to marry it with Bing Crosby, but I guess that would have been difficult to do. Not necessarily off topic, but I am not a huge fan of electronic duets. In fact, I have every Frank Sinatra album except for his albums, because I know they were not recorded at the same time in the same room, and you can tell. And that's something that I don't like. If you're going to do a duet, in the case of Bing Crosby and V, it's not possible, obviously. But if you're going to do a duet with Tony Bennett and both of you are alive, you should be in the same room.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely.
Whoever it is, Luis Miguel, or whoever it is. And that's the
Yeah.
reason why I don't have the duet albums by Sinatra, but I have all the other records that he ever made. But in any case, it's good, as Malcolm was saying, if this brings back the song, or it brings Bing back into the top of the charts, and we're starting to talk about Bing Crosby, I think that's a very good thing for his legacy. And it's nice that he has become, in many ways, such an iconic figure that a K-pop singer from South Korea is doing this, whether it is by his own accord or because somebody told him to do it. It is good that younger generations will hear about this man, Bing Crosby, and that's part of what we're trying to do when we do these podcasts every year. Now, my final question, which has to do with White Christmas, and then we'll wrap it up. It's difficult to say to bring this to an end, because I'm always having such a good time talking to you guys, and the question is more of a personal thing. I would like to see if you can convey to the listeners and the viewers what you think about each time that you listen to Bing Crosby singing White Christmas, or each time that you see him on TV, or each time you watch the movie White Christmas and you hear him sing the song. I think this comes up because Malcolm asked me, what about you, Anton, growing up in the northwest of Spain before you moved to the United States? There's no snow there. What did you think about? And in my case, it has to do with, of course, my childhood, but it has become a constant presence in my life. Every time I hear somebody sing White Christmas, or every time I hear the actual phrase White Christmas being spoken by somebody, even if they're not singing, I do think of Bing Crosby, and I do think of my childhood and the first time I ever heard Bing sing this song, and then Sinatra, and then Elvis, and then so many others, of course, Jack Jones, etc. So anyone who wants to start, think about Bing singing White Christmas, not with the verse, because he never did the verse. It was Fred Astaire that did it, as we know, from that TV show that we saw recently that Pentel has brought up. What do you think about? What memories does it bring? What do you feel when you hear Bing
Well,
Crosby and he says, "I'm dreaming of a White Christmas"?
it's a warm feeling. It's nostalgia. It's a warm feeling, and nostalgia is very powerful.
Yeah, same here. I'm just transported back to the time in the 70s, I guess, early 70s, when I was a kid, into a certain house with family and playing the record on my stereo, the MCA record, and holding the record sleeve. And yeah, it's, as Malcolm says, it's a very warm, nostalgic feeling. And it has a degree of comfort level around it, doesn't it? Like you're snuggled back into your childhood,
guess the thing I think about is that it's one of those special pieces of music, and I often think that I've been lucky to uh, be in the presence of Bing when he sang White Christmas at the Palladium and those concerts, and I think of it with other artists too. I've tried to capture these moments in my head, sitting in the third row whilst Tony Bennett sang "I Left My Heart in San Francisco," um, sitting there while to hear Acker Bilk play "Stranger on the Shore," which is a iconic piece. Um, to other people in a similar sort of way. This is a strange one, and you may never have heard of this guy, Anton, but there was a guy, a British pop singer, and it's called Peter Sarsted, who had a one-hit wonder called "Where Do You Go to My Lovely," and I saw him sing that in a sort of 60s gathering, and so and I just think of White Christmas as being one of those special pieces of music, and just feel privileged that I actually heard the man who is associated with it sing it live.
I
Yeah,
totally get that because I didn't, of course. And I watched that clip on the Parkinson show from '72 and think, what would it have been like to be sitting in the front row listening to that? Because I did see Tony Bennett a couple of times, and I remember the second time coming out of the Albert Hall and saying to my wife, "Hey, you've just heard Tony Bennett sing 'I Left My Heart in San Francisco.'" And kind of dismissed it like, well, "Are we going to get something to eat now?" Or whatever,
Yes. Yeah.
The same, it was the same in 2015 when I went with my son at the O2 to see the Monty Python team. And we came out of there and I said to him, "Do you realise you've just seen the Pythons do the parrot sketch?"
Yes. Yeah. 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 I had it last year. We sat in the front row while Tom Jones sang Delilah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
well, if it had been Dean Martin, it would have been "I Left My Heart in San Francisco." It's memory, but it carries into the present. It's past. It's present, and it's just a constant presence. Songs like what White Christmas are really part of who we have been and who we are. And I always think of the way Christmas was in my childhood, which is my memory of the way it was, which was probably not the way it really was, but kind of White Christmas and a few other songs kind of crystallize that for me whenever I think about it. And that's why I think it's such a powerful song, because that's really the power of music like that. It brings you back to a place and time where you were and to which you will never return. And I think that's an important thing to think about. And that's why, Ken, I definitely appreciate your having suggested this topic. We've been talking for about an hour and a half, and you said it'd probably keep us going for about an hour. No, it probably could be talking for a couple more hours, and there'll be more stuff to say. So, Ken, thank you so much for being here today on this yearly Bing Crosby podcast on the Jazz Flashes podcast here on my channel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason, also for all the work that you do as well, monthly for the different meetings that we have. And thanks again for guesting on the show again this year.
Yeah, thank you, Anton. Merry Christmas to you.
And Malcolm, thank you so much. As always, it's the 9th year, and I hope that you, Malcolm, and Jason and Ken will be back for the 10th anniversary next year of the yearly Bing Crosby podcast.
Keep the fingers crossed.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Malcolm, Jason, Ken. Merry Christmas. And this has been, as I always say, a new episode of the Jazz Flashes podcast, our yearly Bing Crosby podcast. If you're interested in learning more about the International Club Crosby and everything that we do, make sure that you check the link that I'm going to leave in the description of this video, and you'll find all the information about the magazine that we publish and about all the different things that come with becoming a member of the International Club Crosby. And in parting, I'll say what I normally say, besides happy holidays. We hope you enjoy this conversation that we had today, and I'm sure that the podcast will be, or come in handy, as old Bing himself would have said, if you're snowbound or there's a bus strike or something. Thank you, everybody. Merry Christmas, and see you next year.
Yeah,
Thanks.
great. Thanks. See you in January, guys, hopefully. Take care.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.